Listen, what if I told you that your addiction is not a damnation but a dialect? Not a mere defect in character, but a secret scripture by which the infinite utters itself to the elect? Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his highest hours, perceived a truth of this kind, that the human soul is a speaking organ of the divine, and that its most violent disquiet may be a form of speech. Consider for a moment how we judge the fallen. Society points an accusing finger. It measures sin by the ledger of habit and calls the persistent thirst a crime against prudence. Yet the old wise whisper in the forest says otherwise. There are forces at work within us that do not fit the merchant's account books. Addiction, be it to the bottle, to appetite, to power, or to the feverish praise of men, may be the voice of some deeper hunger. It may be the soul's language, a dialect of the infinite that troubles the shallow peace of a life content with little. Observe how Emerson taught that the soul is not a small thing to be corrected, but a vast field to be plowed. What looks like weakness may be the first tremor of a new destiny. When the craving shakes you, it does not simply undermine you. It announces you. It says, there is an ache here, and this ache demands passage. The compulsion that you hate may be a God's knocking, not to punish, but to rouse thought. Do you know that strange paradox? The more you strive to silence the wanting, the louder it becomes. Resistance scours the spirit and leaves a hollowness, and in that hollow the hunger multiplies. Emerson wrote of wild, indomitable urges that demand expression. To deny their lesson is to harden the very stone through which the light would come. Thus the fight, the relapse, the shame are not random cruelties, but stages of an inner pedagogy. Hear me plainly. All craving carries a sign. The object of your compulsion is less important than the hunger it indexes. We reach for drink, for conquest, for comfort, for endless movement, because somewhere in the soul there is a lack that will not be smoothed by objects. The sacred void, call it a God-shaped absence, sits hungry in every breast. Most quiet their void with the small arts of conformity. The marked few cannot. Their hunger grows into a fire that refuses simple embers. This restlessness is a summons to transformation, not merely a call to self-pity. Look at those who are labeled addicts and see not only their ruin but their capacity. There exists, Emerson would say, a fierce electiveness in suffering. That very intensity can be a conduit for greater insight, for imaginative sympathy, for a temperature of soul which eases no ordinary comfort. Addiction is the glass that magnifies the inner wound. It reveals, by the fever of its illumination, where the spirit is raw and open to change. The drunkard's thirst is not merely the thirst for alcohol. It is the thirst for an experience of the real. There are souls for whom ordinary scenes are thin and colorless. Industry and polite pleasures do not touch them deeply. They reach, therefore, for a transcendence in the bottle, because the bottle briefly dissolves the walls between the self and the infinite. That dissolution is not the cure, but it is also the clue. Emerson never praised the stupefied escape, yet he would sympathize with the soul that seeks any aperture into the timeless thought now. Be warned, this is not an elegant consolation for indulgence. The very thing that points toward the sacred becomes the barrier to it. The ladder used to climb may also be the chain that binds. The brief epiphany in the high becomes a long captivity. The instrument by which the soul sought union becomes the instrument of fracture. This cruel inversion is the secret paradox of the divine pedagogy. The remedy and the disease may be siblings. Here is the essential Emersonian lesson. The crises of the life ask for a different courage than the mere regiment of the will. You cannot command the soul into submission by gritted teeth. The harder you bid the wave to cease, the more it foams. In these tumultuous intimations, Emerson counseled a kind of lucid surrender, not defeat but a yielding that recognizes the voice within. Surrender, in this sense, is not capitulation. To appetite, It is an attentive listening to the hunger as oracle. When you listen, the craving speaks not only its indictment but its prayer and its map. This listening requires an honesty without mercy towards the self's half-light. You must descend into the closet where the shadow keeps its miser. You must converse in the intimacy of solitude with the parts you have hidden. For the soul that speaks in addiction is often the shadow you have refused to name. Anger, shame, a naked hunger for regard, grief unwept. These are not mere defects to be eradicated by force. They are members of your nature that demand recognition and integration. Emerson taught the doctrine of the Oversoul, that there is a universal spirit which animates each private mind. The addiction might be an awkward dialect of that Oversoul. Its compulsions are extreme speech acts. They tell us where the Oversoul knocks, where the private enclosure is thin. If we treat them as nuisances only, we miss the altar. If we punish them until they sleep, we may stifle an eventual song. Do not be deceived. The passage toward wholeness will be paved with relapse. Every apparent failure is a lesson in the anatomy of the soul. The descent into darkness is not an aimless spiral. It is a corridor. Each fall reveals a new facet of the wound. Each rising carries away a little dust. Emerson would point to the meaning of that cyclical travail. The soul is being rehearsed for a larger capacity of compassion and insight. Those who have tasted the abyss can later speak to others who stand at its lip. You must understand. The remedy is not simply stoic will nor etiquette of shame. The remedy is the alchemy of integration. To integrate is to translate the raw into the articulate. It is not to deny the shadow, but to sit with it, name it, befriend it, and thereby alter its force. Integration makes the shadow useful. It hands the shadow a pen rather than letting it burn the house. A practical beginning when the craving rises. Ask not merely, how do I stop? But what is this craving saying? What hunger does it voice? Is it the hunger for communion, for meaning, for kinship, for power, for escape, for mercy? The honest answer may surprise you. Once the need is seen, one may begin to tend it. Supply the soul what the substance pretended to give. Solace with awareness, communion with presence, meaning with work that reflects the heart. Remember Emerson's insistence on self-trust. He did not mean a self that is blind to its depth, but a self that can be intimate with its infirmities and yet proceed. Trust that the capacity to heal lies within the very movement of your longing. The hunger that once hurled you into ruin can, if attended, be redirected into creative energy, song, service, labor that cures the loneliness of the soul. And what of the wound that will not close? There are marks placed upon some souls that do not vanish simply because we wish them so. Emerson would not call these afflictions arbitrary punishments. He would recognize them as forms of calling. The wound that endures becomes a channel of compassion. Your pain bestows upon you the power to stand in another's ache without flinching. The sacred wound is not a badge of honor, but an entryway to a ministry of heart. If this seems austere, it is because the work is austere. It demands an interior discipline that is not the brittle law of shame, but the long practice of turning toward. Each relapse becomes the ground for new attention. Each recovery is not a trophy, but a lesson in the grammar of your soul. When the compulsion loosens, it will not be because you beat it, but because you have changed its meaning. Here, therefore, is the Emersonian injunction. Do not treat your addiction merely as an enemy to be crushed. Treat it as a messenger to be deciphered. Attend to its lament and learn the language. Build rituals that answer the soul's hunger in healthier grammar rituals of work, of solitude, of nature, of art, of honest speech. Replace the false communion of the drink with the true communion of presence. Replace the fleeting triumph of conquest with the slow victories of an examined life. And know this: the very trials that make you tremble may, in time, make you a lamp to others. No one who has not been undone can mend another with full truth. Your descent, if met with courage and curiosity, will press you into a wisdom that refuses the easy consolations of culture and offers instead a quiet, luminous help dot. So when the next impulse floods you, do not only recoil, observe, ask, listen. Let the hunger speak and take down its script. Then, by small acts of fidelity to the soul's deeper needs, begin to translate craving into calling, fracture into passage, wound into window. Emerson would say the divinity in you awaits this work. It will not be satisfied with less. This is not pious comfort. It is a summons to a style of life. The addiction is not merely to be stopped. It is to be heard, named, and transmuted into an instrument of meaning. That is the possible miracle, the compulsion that once enslaved. You becomes the very kill within which your new self is formed. Let this be your practice tonight. Carve an hour from the calendar and sit with what you fear. Do not hurry from the ache. Name it aloud. Write its sentences until you hear their rhythm. Then offer it a small counter-ritual walk in the morning. Light, pluck a page of true reading. Make a meal with your own hands. Speak one honest sentence to a person you trust. These modest vows, kept repeatedly, alter the landscape of longing. Emerson held that habit forms the temple in which the soul dwells. Form then the ritual that will shelter your yearning, that will teach it a new phrase. Be patient with the seasoning of your spirit. The work is slow because your life is vast. Not by a single crusade will you be remade, but by 100 tiny returns to truth. Each time you choose the inner question over the instant solace, you change the economy of your desire. The chain slackens not by force, but by restructuring the appetite into a life of meaning. Finally, let charity be your constant companion. Do not expect the harsh world to supply you with tenderness. Give it first, in small acts, to yourself, in clear speech and careful rest. To others, in the listening that requires you to be present. Emerson taught that the only politics that matter are the politics of the soul, how one governs one's inner weather. When you govern it with grace and attention, you become the instrument by which healing flows outward. Therefore, rise from despair, not by denial but by engaged reflection. Let the addiction be the question you spend the rest of your life answering. And when you have answered, you will find the answer has always been waiting inside you, patient as the sea. Remember, the soul is its own revelation. Attend to its speech with reverence, and the very hunger that once threatened to undo you will teach you how to become luminous in the dark. Now, let us move deeper into the work that must be done. Addiction, Emerson would insist, is not simply an episode in the biography of a man. It is the crucible in which a higher character may be forged. When the craving rises and the heart tightens, do not only recoil, attend. Notice how the pattern returns. In that repetition, you may read the grammar of your soul. Begin, then, with solitude that is not mere loneliness, but a shelter for inquiry. Sit in a small, quiet room and ask, with entire candor, what the wanting seeks. Do not ask, why am I weak? Ask instead, what need does this appetite voice? Weakness invites blame. Curiosity invites discovery. Record what you find. The mind that writes its own motions becomes a companion to itself. Make a ledger, not of shame but of witness. What preceded the urge? What feelings rose like tides before the reaching? What memories returned? Over time patterns appear. Certain evenings, certain relationships, certain foods or songs that act as triggers. Insight is the first remedy because it converts maiming into intelligible cause. Next, craft small rituals that answer the hunger in healthier speech. If the craving seeks annihilation, create a life-affirming rite, a brisk walk in cold air, a cup of tea prepared with deliberate hands, a single page of reading that you will not deny yourself. Rituals need not be grand. They need fidelity. Repeated acts create the home in which desire can change its tone. Find the company of a witness. Emerson prized friends who require honesty rather than applause. Tell one trustworthy person what you are living through. Speak the exact words of your craving and your shame. Saying it aloud strips part of its fog. The other steady seeing steadies the wandering mind. Practice the art of small renunciations. Begin with tiny abstentions that are manageable. Refuse one usual indulgence this week. Sleep an hour earlier. Skip one habitual scroll. Each successful abstention weakens the tyrant of impulse and builds the muscle of self-trust. The aim is not punishment, but alteration of habit through repeated, compassionate refusal. Hold paradox, both that the impulse is tragic and that it is a teacher. Do not collapse into condemnation or indulgence. The soul requires the discipline of a double gaze, one that notices harm and one that listens for gift. In conversation with the craving, ask what memory it serves, what wound it conceals, what tenderness it seeks. Often the answer will be small, a need for rest, apology, honest affection. Tend those smaller needs and the lure shifts. Cultivate work that demands the whole of you. Emerson believed that malaise is often remedied by honest labor that draws the mind into skillful attention. When you are given a task that immerses attention, the hungry self loses its stage. Work can be anything that requires concentration and offers contribution. Gardening, writing, tending another life, crafting with hands. The practice of skilled attention is curative because it teaches presence. Invite art to enter the parlor of your hunger. Music, painting, making things, these are medicine. Let the urge be translated into form. Sing to the body. Shape clay. Compose a few sentences that are only for you. The hand that shapes clay shapes also the appetite that once demanded escape. Tend the body as ally. Sleep, breath, food, movement are not trifles. They are the ground of lucidity. A nervous system starved of rest or flooded with stimulants cannot hear the soul's subtle speech. Calm the appetite with steady nights, cold water, gentle motion. Small changes in the body refract the force of craving. Practice confession before action. When the impulse arrives, do not enact it immediately. Pause and name it. This is wanting, or name the feeling, shame, loneliness, rage, aloud if you can. Naming distances the impulse by giving it shape. The pause opens a space where choice returns. Seek integration through counsel and community. The Emersonian hero was not a contemptuous loner. He kept counsel and learned from those who had walked dark corridors and lived to tell their story. Professional help, a mentor, a spiritual guide, these are not surrenders but acceptances of allies. A soul in travail needs companions who have borne similar burdens. Practice forgiveness not as abstract sweetness but as method. Forgive yourself for past capitulations. Forgive the body for betrayals. Shame is an extra stone on the chest. Forgiveness removes weight and deepens the breath. Pair forgiveness with responsibility. Soothe without dissolving accountability. Take up a daily clearing ritual. 10 lines of truth, inked each morning. Write your fear, your desire, your plan. The habit of early attention trains the mind to bring disquiet to light before the day scatters it. The small page is a sanctum. Keep it with a devotion that is humble and relentless. Reframe your life as narrative rather than failure. Name the arc, descent, test, ascent. The narrative transforms shame into meaning, anchors endurance, and teaches that valleys shape the future summit. Endurance here is a patient art, not a brittle stoicism. It knows that the soul is being remade in the slow crucible of return. Expect to fall. Even the most faithful fall. When you stumble, record it with the same patience you would use to record a sunrise. Ask, what led here? What tenderness was missing? What memory rose unchecked? Make these inquiries without fury. Each careful question moves you from reaction into deliberation, from slavery into practice. If you keep faithful to such modest practices, the craving loses its singular sovereignty. It yields to a wider life in which pain is present, but not commanding. You will still meet longing, but it will not be the tyrant. The soul learns to read its language and answer with gentleness. Remember Emerson's counsel. Our glory is not in never falling, but in rising each time we fall. Let that be the ethic. Not the triumph of immediate victory, but the humility of daily return. Addiction will remain a chapter in your story, yet need not be the last. With curiosity, ritual, labor, witness, art, tenderness, and forgiveness, you may transmute the very matter that once bound you into the means of liberty. Make a small, practical promise tonight. Name one tiny practice you will repeat each day for a week, then keep it. The fidelity of one small rite is the seed from which larger courage grows. When the impulse surges, you will have a counterweight practiced into your muscle. Lastly, give tenderness first, to yourself and then to others. Do not wait for the world to be merciful. Offer mercy where you can. A small meal to someone, a listening hour, a clear apology. The practice of generosity softens the edges of shame and teaches the heart that the world may hold you, even when you fear it will not. This is not quick piety. It is the long labor of becoming. The addiction is not merely to be defeated. It is to be understood, named, tended, and, where possible, transmuted. Thus, the compulsion that once enslaved you may become the kill in which your new life is fired. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, unmistakable, when a man realizes the storm within him has changed its nature. What once raged as addiction now stands revealed as invitation. Not an invitation to pleasure, nor escape, but to wholeness. The soul has spoken in the only language it knew, and now, finally, you are listening. In this moment of clarity, do not rush. Stand still. Let the truth settle into your bones. Your life, with all its wounds and wild cravings, has been shaping you for this hour. You were not meant to remain broken. You were meant to be broken open. The next step is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is not heroic in the way stories pretend. The next step is simple, subtle, almost invisible. You begin to live from the center rather than the surface. You begin to act from truth rather than fear. You begin to respond rather than react. This inward turn is the beginning of rebirth. Emerson wrote that all great transformations begin with the calm determination to claim one's own nature. And you are now ready for that calm. Ready to claim what has always been yours, your inner authority, your unborrowed voice, your unbroken core. Your shadow, once feared, now becomes a companion. You begin to see that it was never malice within you, only neglected wisdom. The impulses that once shook you now offer guidance. A craving becomes a signpost. Here is where you must heal. Here is where you must listen. This new way of seeing alters everything. You stop asking, "How do I get rid of this?" and begin asking, "What is this showing me?" That single shift from rejection to inquiry is the hinge upon which your life turns. You learn to walk slowly, calmly, deliberately. You begin to honor the signals of the soul. When loneliness rises, you do not drown it. You sit with it. When fear arrives, you meet it with breath rather than battle. When sorrow pulls at your chest, you no longer flee. You follow its thread inward. This is the work of a lifetime. And it changes you in ways the world cannot understand. There will come evenings when you feel the old temptation stir. These moments are not failures. They are invitations to practice your new strength. Do not panic. Do not shame yourself. Pause. Breathe. Ask, what need calls to me now? Often the need is simple. Rest, warmth, honesty, kindness, connection. Tend to the need and the craving dissolves like fog touched by sunlight. If you fall again, as all humans do not condemn yourself. Emerson said, "A man is what he thinks all day long." Focus then, not on the fall but on the rising. Spend your energy on the new path, not the old stumbling. Each return to the path builds endurance. Each small victory strengthens the spine. Slowly, imperceptibly, the addiction loosens its grip. Not because it vanished, but because you no longer fear your own depths. You have walked into the underworld and discovered that the monster was simply an unhealed part of you asking to be welcomed home. At this stage, a new hunger awakens, not the frantic hunger that once ruled you, but a quiet yearning for meaning. You begin to feel drawn to books, ideas, people, and places that nourish the spirit. You find yourself seeking solitude not for escape, but for understanding. You may visit nature more. Forest paths feel like companions. Water comforts you. Sunlight begins to feel like a blessing again. You start sensing that the world has always been trying to speak to you. You were simply too numb to hear it. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is resurrection. The dull parts of your soul begin to glow again. You laugh more softly, but more sincerely. You think more slowly, but more deeply. You love more carefully, but more truthfully. Your relationships shift. Some drift quietly away. No anger, no drama. Only the natural shedding of what no longer fits your truth. Others draw closer, drawn by the steadiness they see forming in you. These are the relationships worth keeping. They meet you in honesty, not illusion. You may feel compelled to speak less. Emerson warned that the soul grows thin through excessive speech. You now understand this. You save your words for what matters. You prize silence more than noise. Conversations become sacred exchanges rather than casual distractions. Then, without planning for it, you begin to forgive. Not through effort, but through clarity. You forgive yourself for the years lost. You forgive others who contributed to the wound. You forgive life for its harsh lessons. Forgiveness comes naturally once you see that everything, even the darkest moments, played a role in your becoming. And now a strange, beautiful thing begins. Your old pain becomes useful. You start to recognize people who are where you once were. Their eyes carried the same hunger you carried. Their confusion echoes your past. And you realize, without pride, without ego, that you know how to speak to them because you have lived their darkness. This is the quiet birth of purpose. You become a healer without trying to be one. People trust you because your compassion is not theoretical. It was carved into you by experience. You do not preach. You do not judge. You simply sit with them and your presence says, "I know. You're not alone." In this way, your wound becomes a doorway for grace to move into the world. Your addiction, the thing that once dragged you to the brink, becomes the very thing that qualifies you to guide others. The thorn that wounded you becomes the needle that stitches others back together. What once broke you now becomes your bond with those who suffer. Slowly, the sacred wound becomes a sacred gift. And so you rise, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. The kind of rising that does not need applause. The kind of rising that only truth can sustain. You begin to build a new life. A life not ruled by impulse, but guided by intention. A life that honors your sensitivity rather than hides it. A life in which your past does not vanish, but becomes the foundation of your understanding. You see now that God never cursed to you. He called to you. Through the thirst, through the shadow, through the repeated falling, He drew you inward, toward the self you had abandoned. Addiction was the loudest teacher, but it was never the enemy. It was the storm that revealed the strength of your roots. In the end, you understand what Emerson meant when he wrote that the soul refuses limits. Your soul refused to settle for numbness. It demanded depth, and it used craving to awaken you. Now you stand on new ground. Not cured, but aware. Not perfect, but whole. Not free of shadow, but in partnership with it. And this wholeness is worth more than any ease you once craved. Walk forward now with clarity. Let your past be a lantern, not a chain. Let your wound be a teacher, not a tormentor. Let your addiction be the chapter that taught you how to rise. And when the old hunger stirs, as it sometimes will, place your hand over your heart. And remember, you were never abandoned. You were being prepared. Not for comfort, but for depth. Not for ordinary life, but for meaningful life. Not for perfection, but for authenticity. And authenticity is the true salvation.